All right, fantasy owners, we're now on the 5 to avoid side of things for the Week 10 edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report. These are guys that you really kind of want to worry about this week or going forward for your fantasy action this week. Guys that you really want to maybe shy away from or aren't too strong about for your lineups this week in order to try to get that victory for you. Um, so, quarterbacks this week. Top of my list. Um, and normally, again, this is a guy you normally start with the right matchups. And last week he had a big week with 26 fantasy points. But this week I think it's going to be a little bit tougher sledding for him, and that's Jay Cutler of Chicago. Obviously, you might not be able to afford to sit him this week because if you say you're a Rogers Cutler owner and you got to go with him, okay. But what I'm saying is here that you really might want to temper expectations because that Houston defense, even without Brian Cushing, is still very, very strong. And I'm envisioning a situation where Mr. Cutler is going to be on his butt a numerous amount of times. So, unfortunately, I only see Cutler as maybe more of a number 2 play this week. Obviously, if you can't afford to sit him, then obviously you can definitely play him this week. But really, really, really temper expectations because this Texans defense is still very, very strong, and I don't really see a big, big day from Jay Cutler. He might get into double-digit points, but I don't see the elite numbers that he put up last week because of the tougher matchup for him. Other QBs that I'm worried about this week, don't be fooled by BlaineGabbert's big numbers last week. He did put up 18 fantasy points, but and even though this is a great matchup with the Colts this week, I don't think Gabbert's going to have to throw a lot. Rashad Jennings is loving this matchup, obviously, the Jaguars running back, who's filled in not great for Maurice Jones-Drew, but certainly admirable enough as a number 2, number 3 play. But I don't think Gabbert's going to have to throw a lot in this game. I think they'll definitely try to lean on Jennings a little bit more. So don't be fooled by this surprising play. He might break out and he might show some more consistency, but I only see him as a number 2, number 3 play. I wouldn't really start him this week unless you're really, really desperate. So again, temper expectations on that, but I don't see a big week from BlaineGabbert. Andy Dalton going against the Giants. This is kind of a shocking statistic that I found out, and this is why I cut ties with Dalton immediately as my backup guy and got Carson Palmer instead. Andy Dalton has thrown an interception. I believe this is true, and if it's not, someone please correct me. I read that he's thrown one now in 7 straight games, and that he's the only Bengal or the only quarterback to really ever do that. I mean, that's in a 7-game span. That's pretty surprising. But you also have to understand he's only a second-year player, and he did put up some decent stats earlier in the year, but it also shows the youth of Andy Dalton. So going up against the Giants, I don't really like this matchup for him. I see him as more of a number 2, number 3 play, and he's been nothing more than a number 2 all year, or maybe even a slight number 1 based on the matchup. But I don't really like him this week, and if he's going to keep being a turnover machine, I don't like him going forward. Ryan Fitzpatrick, at this point, you're really not working the play. He's more of a desperate number 3 option. Definitely no, not against the Patriots. He's not worth it. And another one you don't want to touch is Matt Castle going against the Steelers. The Chiefs' offense, obviously, not exactly juggernaut anyway, unless Jamal Charles. But even him, is a risky play. So just leave him alone. The wild card I'm going to throw to you guys is Joe Flacco. Just based on the fact that I think they are going to try to run the ball more this week because, again, Oakland just got gashed by Doug Martin, and I think that they are going to – and they get a sense from that, they can be run on. So when really Oakland was kind of a middle-of-the-tier pack against the run coming into that week, and it was just kind of an out-of-the-blue thing that Martin was able to gash them so much. In a CBS league, Martin had 51 fantasy points. That's clearly one of the best performances, if not the best, by a running back all season. So, and I also read that Martin is right now the number 1 running back. He's 1 point above Arian Foster. That's certainly surprising. So, again, I just think Flacco's more of a number 2 play this week just because I think they're going to run it more. Running backs. Unfortunately, I think Chris Johnson's going to fall back to earth this week. He's going up against the Dolphins this week. We know how strong the Dolphins are against the run. They're number 3 in that category. But you might not be able to afford to sit Chris Johnson at this point. There aren't a whole lot of options out there at this point. As they would say, that the pickings are slim on the wire, or he might have some injured guys behind him. So you really might not be able to afford to sit Chris Johnson, but he's definitely not going to have the week that he had last week with 16 fantasy points, or the weeks he's had recently with good matchups. But so definitely temper expectations for Chris Johnson this week. I see more of a number 2, maybe low-end number 3 this week because of that tough matchup against the Dolphins. I don't like Vic Bauer to the Colts against Jacksonville this week, or any Colts running back for that matter. Believe it or not, Jacksonville is actually pretty decent against the run. They actually do a pretty nice job of that. Their pass secondary is not great, which is why I think the Colts are going to throw. So again, I don't like them. Granted, there hasn't really been a number 1 elite option in Indianapolis all year. Usually Donald Brown's the starter, but then he got hurt, and then they integrated Vic Bauer into the offense, and Mueldy Moore into the offense, and DeLon Carter into the offense, and it's so much to make your head loopy and spin. So really, I don't like any of them this week against Jacksonville. I would just sit those guys and look for better options. Lions guy real quick. A lot of people are saying to pick up Jockey or Jackie, I don't know how you pronounce it, Bell of the Lions. I don't buy into him just yet. He put up 16 fantasy points last week, but I think Mikel Ashore is still the guy to own. He's still clearly behind him on the depth chart. Let's not get cute, okay? It's numbers, but you got to have consistency. And just now he's starting to come around and get this a little bit more work involved, but he is no threat to Mikel Ashore right now. Absolutely none. At least not from what I've been seeing, at least not from what I've been hearing. I think he's more of a number 2, number 3 play. If you're desperate to play him, if you're desperate for some depth at running back, then yeah, maybe he's a safe pickup for you. But I wouldn't recommend starting him, not unless something drastic happens to Ashore. Then no, I wouldn't risk it. I don't also like BenJarvus Green-Ellis this week against the Giants. I'm just not sold on him as number 1 guy. He's been so inconsistent this year. And I mentioned him earlier, but Jamal Charles, you're definitely not maybe I don't know about definitely not, but again, if you can afford better options out there, but I wouldn't start him against the Steelers. He's more of a number 2, number 3 guy. It's a tough matchup. Plus, he had the neck injury last week on that shot that he took against San Diego, and obviously I think he's going to play, but still, you really want to kind of risk for that situation there. Wide receivers. Not only bye weeks are a big hit on this week, but one of the more productive members of the Pittsburgh Steelers will be out this week. Coach Mike Brown said that Antonio Brown, Mike Tomlin, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said Mike Brown, because it's Antonio Brown, that's why. He said that it is doubtful that Brown will play this week against Kansas City, so feel free to keep him benched this week. That's a big up for guys again like Mike Wallace, Heath Miller, maybe even Emmanuel Sanders gets involved a little bit in the offense. Could be a number 3 pickup for you for this week. But they are expecting, from what I hear, to have Brown back for Week 11. But definitely monitor his status, but you definitely want to bench Antonio Brown this week. Another line that I'm not sold on yet is Ryan Broyles. I know he got more targets than Titus Young last week and had a better overall fantasy day. But really, neither of them had a great day. Broyles had 5 points. Young had 2. Whoopee. But Young is still the clear, I think, number 2 behind Megatron. I still think, Broyles, I think, is at this point nothing more than a desperate number 3. I still think I'd rather have Titus Young on my roster at this point. Don't like Torrey Smith this week. See Joe Flacco. I think Baltimore is going to run the ball down Oakland's throats. I mentioned Donnie Avery in my last video, but only because I don't like him this week, because he might not play this week on the short week coming off that hip injury. Only if he plays, I see him as a number 2, number 3. He's obviously ahead of T.Y. Hilton on the depth chart at this point, but again, coming on that short week, you definitely want to monitor Donnie Avery's status. And Kevin Ogletree of Dallas. People, don't get too excited. Seriously, I mean, yeah, he had that breakout week in Week 1. We were all talking about, Kevin Ogletree, he's an excellent Robinson. Well, yes, myself included. We all were, okay? But now he's completely disappeared off the fantasy radar. He only had this one big week. He's still behind Miles Austin and Des Bryant and Jason Witten on the depth chart. Don't go too crazy on him. He's nothing more than number. He could be a number 3 play for you with the right matchup, or if there are any better options out there. But it's a risk playing him every single week because you don't know what you're going to get from him. And real quick, tight ends for the week. The one I think you guys really want to avoid this week again, and I know Bengals, a lot of them on this list, but I just don't like him this week, and that's Jermaine Gresham. Had 10 points last week, but again, that Giants defense, tough matchup. I only see Gresham as number 2 play this week for you. He might get a touchdown, but again, he's kind of a hit and miss kind of play. You don't know what you're going to expect from him, so definitely a tough matchup there. Don't buy into Charles Clay of Miami just yet. He had 9 points last week, and yeah, it's a great matchup against the Titans, but he was only targeted twice last week. I still think he's behind Fasano on the depth chart, who really didn't get much work anyway. He's only a number 3 option. Scott Chandler, again, any Buffalo Bill you're probably not starting this week. You might not even want to start C.J. Spiller and Fred Jackson unless you don't have better options. But Scott Chandler, you're really desperate here if you're hoping to start him. He's nothing more than number 2, number 3 guy. Martellus Bennett, what has happened to him? He is completely, speaking of guys that have disappeared off the fantasy radar, he has completely disappeared. Clearly now far and away behind Victor Cruz, maybe even Hakeem Nicks. So I only see him as a number 2, number 3 play this week. And a desperate number 3, if only you're desperate, is Mercedes Lewis of Jacksonville going up against the Colts. He might get you a touchdown this week, but he is really hair puller extreme. I wouldn't risk it if I were you. So that's just the way I see it this week. All right, guys. That's it. That's it this week. For week 10, those are the guys you want to avoid or worry about or not. Risky plays this week. Again, don't forget to check out the Facebook notes with more detailed information on these players and the 5 to Ride video as well. If you haven't checked that out just yet, go ahead and check that out this week. We are, as you know, committed here to making sure that you guys win your fantasy weeks, push toward that championship. We're getting to the nitty-gritty now, guys. It's week 10 already. So at this point, you're really trying to make, every move you make is critical. Every start decision you make is critical. Everything you do at this point in the season is making that push for the playoffs. And if you're out of it at this point, if you're sitting there with only 1, 2 wins, maybe even no wins, then at this point you're just playing for pride. You're just playing hopefully to be maybe be a spoiler for a guy who's making that playoff push. So don't give up on the season just because you signed up to play this game because you love it, and you signed up to play this game because you're an owner. You own this. You don't see an owner on a team giving up middle of the season and quitting because things have gone bad. No, they keep experimenting with things. So keep on going, even if you're not quite there. For the rest of us, keep on making that push, and good luck this week, and we'll be back again next week for Week 11 to break things all down again right here on the Fantasy Football Stock Report. Thanks, guys.